thank you all. You can hear me, right? I talk loud and I got a microphone, so you should definitely be able to hear me. So I'm Thad Kubis, and I'm local. I've been local. I live in Sheffield, moved there about 30 years ago. The story I'm going to present goes way back, it's sort of realistically linked to this timeline that's on the wall, because I was born in 1950, although I really am only 21. Look at that. Oh man. So, but the concept is, this story starts when I was about 13 years old. And the concept of the story is sort of simple. So I'm a photographer, I should tell you that, I'm a photographer. So I was really troubled with the fact that I was at an event and some guy mentioned something, which we'll get into in a second. So I started thinking about this idea of what I would have done if I had a camera when I was 13 years old, or around that age, right? And it's called Photographs I Could Have Taken But Did Not. This is me in 1954, just as handsome today as I was then. So the interesting thing about all of these pictures, which I'll get into in great detail, my parents never took pictures. My father would load up his Instamatic, usually in May, and then get it processed after Christmas, and then maybe load it up again in January, and maybe it might go through part of the summer, but we don't really have many pictures. But that's one of the ones I found. Also, I made a decision that I was going to keep all of these pictures to as close to their original look as possible. So I didn't want to dress them, I didn't want to retouch them. And so I scanned all these pictures in a technique that makes them look as they looked in the original. Okay? All right. And I'll take questions whenever you have them to ask. So why? So I always wanted to be an artist. And this is a picture by Robert Wood, who was an artist in the 40s, 50s. And this picture, this exact picture, not this physical one, hung on my wall in my parents', in our dining room, which was our general room. And I tried to paint this dozens of times. And though it came out pretty good, I mean, I did it good, it really didn't drain the emotion of doing something more creative. So when that happened, I realized I needed to find something else. And I figured if Robert Wood was not as good as a painter as this, I probably wouldn't be here today, at least doing this. So here's what happened. First of all, I really had to go back and think about what I was trying to get across. And one of the things that happened is, I mentioned this, I was teaching a class at the Longwood High School in Huntington, Long Island. And this one 16, 17-year-old kid came over to me and said, look, I'm here to learn about cameras because I've got to look over my birthday pictures this weekend. So I got birthday pictures. And I said, how long do you expect that to take? He goes, well, I have over 500. And I said, 500 pictures? And he goes, that's just mine. And that started me to think about, you know what? Where was all these pictures when I was a kid, right? Today we have click, click, click everywhere, right? So the concept was, how can I go back and really think about what I wanted to do, how I wanted to do, and be truthful about it? I was interviewed by Berkshire Eagle, and one of the first questions that he asked, the interviewer asked, was, is this real? I said, totally. Because there's nothing that I know that's fabricated here, right? So the question was, at that age, not at this age, could I take pictures? What would I take pictures of, and what would I do with those pictures, right? Those are questions I asked today as a photographer. So, but at the time, I was like 11, 12 years old. I had no real idea what pictures were. All I knew about photography was my dad read the Daily News in the morning in New York City. He read the Journal American in the afternoon. And every Thursday there was a thing called the Greenpoint Weekly Star, which was a local paper which he also read, right? So all I knew was news photography. I didn't know anything else about photography. The concept of fine art photography was yet to be born. You've heard of Ansel Adams, right? Ansel Adams was probably the photographer that put fine art photography on the map with his work. And there was Edward Weston, there's a bunch. But for someone like me who was living in a lower income neighborhood, Polish neighborhood in Greenpoint, Brooklyn, we didn't see fine art photography. And that's essentially what I do today. Documentary was what we saw. So I see this picture of Dwight Eisenhower on the wall there. We used to have a movie theater called the Mesrol, and people like Jerry Lewis and Dean Martin would show up when there was a movie going on, and there would be a photographer. But those were old newspaper photography. Again, something that I had no interest in and really no knowledge of. So I put this thought together. This is from someone who wrote, who got the book early on, and he really sort of summarized all the feelings that I had about it. I was overwhelmed when I did this book. It was emotionally overwhelming, it was physically overwhelming, and it was technologically overwhelming for a lot of reasons. This is my friend, he's now my friend, Billy. He was in tears. There were many tears when I wrote the book. My wife said to me that this book was really good for me because it brought out a side of me that I really was probably keeping down. I was hiding with it. Also, I saw things that I never saw before, and I started to realize where I got my today's vision from and why I probably got that vision. And lastly, I really wanted to be transported back to my childhood. I didn't have a terrible childhood. People say, oh, you were born in Brooklyn, you know, you really weren't wealthy, whatever. I had a great time. My parents did the best job they could have done. Maybe it wasn't the perfect job, but I mean, I didn't turn out all that bad. So it was really a wonderful thing for me to do. That all led to this concept that this is the book that I created. This photograph, by the way, 16 years old, and I was hiking in Palisades, some park on the river, Hudson River. I think my wife, my fiance, or my girlfriend at the time, Marie, who became my wife, took that picture, but I'm not really sure. The camera I had there, you'll hear about, is a Minolta SRT 101. And I'll tell you how I got it. I actually found one online, and I have a similar camera now that I use, film camera. This coat, so I was a hippie, early hippie. So I would go to the village and I would change what my parents gave me into clothes from this place called the Digger Shop. And this is a 1940-something Air Force jacket that was all tattered and worn out, but it was very warm. And my mother said to me, what happened to the sweater? I'd say, what sweater? So all these things have these wonderful memories that came back to me, right?
That's you in that picture?
Hmm?
That's you in that picture?
That's me right there. Yep.
From here it looks like a woman.
Well, in this day and age, you never know, right? Who knows? No. No, you know, I was in a rock and roll band, so my hair was longer. But yeah, okay. So this is my mom. So I started to think about the 5 people in my family. My mother was my biggest impact. My father, second. I had a grandmother in Polish we call babci. I had a brother named Michael or Mickey Joe, and myself. So I started to think about what I would have done if I had a photograph, if I could have photographed my mom. So I had to dig deep into files that I didn't even know we had and find this picture. This picture was taken, we think, around 1939 in that area there, right? Before World War II. It was taken by a local photographer named Roberts, who shot this in film. And this is one of the pictures that I didn't want to modernize this. So I could have used technology that sharpened her face and everything, but I didn't want that to happen. So I literally scanned it. What you see is sort of what you get. But the memories I remember of my mom, besides all these wonderful things we did together, was her cooking in the kitchen. And I remember sitting down, I would sit down at a table in our living room, and the kitchen was right over there. And I always remember my mom, she wore a dress a little below her knees. She had an apron on, tied with a big bow in the back. She had heavy stockings on. She had what I call babci shoes. These are dark, very, very thick type of shoes. And that was the picture I would have shot of her. I would have looked at it because the kitchen had a narrow door, window with light shining on it. It would have been lighting on her, on the left side of her face. There was a stove that we had. We had a washing machine that had a ringer on it, right? So it would ring in the car, okay? That's the shot I would have taken of my mom. And I mean, impossible to do at this stage of the game, of course, but I remember so much about what happened after I started thinking about that. I remembered, that's me and my mom. I remember my mother loved to listen to WNEW AM, which was a radio station in New York. And there was this guy called William B. Williams, who had this thing called the Make Believe Ballroom. It was just the anniversary of his death last week, right? And I remember that as being part of it. I remember how that music always filtered throughout the house. And today I have a very, very generic scope of music. I listen to everything from something from the 1800s to, well, not much today, but a lot of the stuff. So I have a feeling that whole thing influenced me. And the picture that kept on coming in my mind was this shot in the kitchen. So I decided I was going to use artificial intelligence to try to create the picture and see what it would came out like, right? So I used 3 or 4 different artificial intelligence programs. And artificial intelligence is what you do is you basically dictate what you want, and the more detailed the picture. But these pictures came out looking very, very false. They were pretty good, but they looked very, very false. So what I decided to do, I made a commitment that if I couldn't find an original shot, I wasn't going to make something up, okay? So you're not going to see a shot of my mother in the kitchen, but if you get a copy of the book and you read about it, you will see that I described it in great detail. Matter of fact, someone told me that he could almost, well, she could almost smell the food being cooked, right? That's the detail of it. So the second person in my life was my father. Now, my name is Thaddeus B. My dad was Thaddeus A. And my dad owned a garage, which was my grandfather's garage. Now, we had no pictures of this garage, but I found out there's a project in New York City called the Real Estate Photograph Taxation Project. And what they did is every 5 to 7 years, they would literally send photographers out and they would photograph every house and every business in every borough, and they recorded photographs of it. Now, some did it in the late 40s, then it moved to the 50s, and some jumped to the 60s. The last time the project was done in the 80s, which has only about 5% of all of the houses, 'cause now they do it with aerial. But this was my father's garage. My father had a garage called Point Garage. Of course, it sat on the point of 2 streets, Manhattan and Larimer Street. And this is when it was owned by my grandfather. It was a Richfield station, which became an Esso station. And then just before my dad got out of the business, it was an Exxon station. But what's amazing is this is sort of what I mean, the pump's a little bit different. 15 cents gas over there, it's at 28 cents gas, right? You can mention 28 cents a gallon of gas. So it was really cool because I had a great time. My dad did not want me to work as hard as he worked. He kept on telling me over and over again, I don't want to see you coming home with dirt in your nails, right? Because my dad would get up at 4 in the morning, and I'll tell you about that story, and he'd come home around 6:30, 7 o'clock at night, and he had this this hand washing routine, which is again mentioned in the book. But more importantly, he didn't want me to get involved in that business. So from the onset, though I did help him, he trained me how to fix cars, whatever else, I worked the night shift because the night guy died and he had no one to work, but he never really wanted me involved in that. What he wanted me to do is what he would say would be sort of more classic, right? But it turns out that this is the only picture I could find of my father in front of the garage. Now, on the right-hand side, your left, is some insurance guy who I don't know, right? I remember him, but I don't. In the middle is my dad, and on the far right is my Uncle Adam. They ran the garage. Now, this is right after the Second World War. Most of my dad's friends were soldiers he served with. But what my dad did, and that's why you got these hands here and the borax, is my father had a habit of at the end of his day, he would go to this stone sink. By the way, my father's garage always won the cleanest bathrooms for Esso while it was around. I cleaned them. But what he did is he would go to this stone sink, get his hands all wet. He'd take this stuff called 20-urolithium borax, right? You all remember that, right? Maybe you do. He'd rub it on his hands, it'd foam up, he'd wash off. Then he would take lye soap, which my grandmother made, and he would rub that on the soap. And then he had a metal brush that he would clean his nails with. And that was his process of cleaning, because when he went home, the last thing he wanted, I guess, my mother to see how dirty his hands were. But I remember my dad's hands looking like this. Now, I found this picture in the Brooklyn Library, so it's not my dad's fingers, but it's close to what I remember. That's what he looked like at the end of the day. What was unique about this relationship was most weekends or most days of the week, if I had the day off or during the summer, my dad would go to work at 4:30. My uncle would show up maybe an hour later. They would shift off week to week. It was my responsibility to bring them breakfast. So as I outlined in my book, I would get up, get on my bike or walk 5 or 6 blocks to a deli called Paulson's. I would get the sandwiches that they all wanted, and I would bring them to the garage, and they would take their break around 8, 9 o'clock in the morning. So what I remember from it is my father smoked 5, 6 packs of Chesterfields, every day there. My uncle smoked about the same. So I remember sitting in this little office that they had, and it was like a billowing smoke around, and they all ate their food with the cigarette in one hand, the sandwich in another. And again, it's outlined in more detail in the book. But during this search, when I started looking at different pictures, there were 50 somewhat thousand photographs just of Greenpoint, Brooklyn alone. It was amazing all the things that I remembered as they were when I was a kid. And that was really the emotional part of it, because I'm not a very outgoing, emotional person, but I could remember bike rides falling. I remember my brother's bike getting stolen, and we were trying to find it, all these things, all because of these wonderful photographs. And right after the book came out, there was this guy from Elmhurst, Queens, who said, hey, I keep in touch with 8 of my old friends. We want to do a book. Help us. So we found out
From
that
Elmhurst,
nearly...
by the way.
Sorry?
I'm from Elmhurst.
Elmhurst, okay. He was on big on
Near
Grand...
Fairyland. Do you remember Fairyland?
Yeah, I do remember Fairyland. I
You
also
go to the
remember
mall?
the White Castle on
White Castle, I
Queenspoint
think it's
Avenue.
still
Yeah.
there. Yeah.
Well, he lived on Grand Avenue, I think it was, Grand Street, I don't remember. But we found out that there's sort of a lost asset that you guys, because I know from working with the Lee Library, have historical records that go back years. Well, most small libraries in New York City have that same type of mix. I was greatly impacted by a librarian who turned me on to science fiction. And when I was doing this book, I contacted them, not to see she is long gone, but to find out that they had this huge memory boxes, but they did nothing with them. They were now in the process, New York City has this process of converting them. But these people from Elmhurst were lucky. Their library had all that stuff digitized. And we literally were able to put together a book on their existence as well. But it was amazing to find what was available. I'm just blown away by the concept and how I was able to supplement my own stories. That was my dad. So I call him Debonair Dad. So I don't know, we have no dates on any of these pictures. I found them in a bunch of different albums over the course of looking through loads of pictures. I'm guessing by his age, it's before World War II. I'm guessing by the chair and the wallpaper. I mean, it might be in a boudoir or in a hotel room. I don't know. It might have been on their honeymoon. I have no idea. My mom and my dad are gone, so I have no way of knowing it. But what I like about this picture is that little smile on my dad's face. Because though I saw my dad smile a lot, I also saw his unsmile when I did something stupid. So one day I was riding my bike over the Kosciuszko Bridge over Newtown Creek, and I see this truck in front of me. So I grab onto the back of the truck, right? So I really was tired of riding up the bike, and there's a horn beeping behind me, and I'm going like this, right? It's not I was. I pull off on Meeker Avenue. This truck comes past me, goes sideways my father. So I didn't see that smile then, right? I saw a really nasty smirk, and I felt a couple of nasty smirks on my head, right? But it goes back again, the emotion of creating a project like this, a book like this, has been really stunning for me. My dad outlived my mother. My mother and my father and my brother were alcoholics. So my mom died from alcoholism, my father was a recovered alcoholic, and my brother died from alcoholism. So
Was your brother older or younger?
he was 5 years older than I was. Yeah, we'll get into him. I have a whole section on him for a couple of specific reasons. So to have my dad live, my dad died when he was 97 years old. But two of my grandmothers, my Bapchi here, she was 104 years old. So there's a little bit, and that's my mother's mother. My father's mother died at 102. So, but in any case, so my grandmother was instrumental in my life for a lot of different reasons because I was a street kid. I'd get up in the morning and before anyone else had coffee, I didn't drink coffee at the time, I was out. My grandmother was the one who sort of was able to sort of focus my energy on things. And one of the things that I helped her with is she had a friend on the north side. So Greenpoint sits in the upper part of Brooklyn near Newtown Creek. The north side was an Italian section. It was a little bit more run down. But my grandmother would go there at least twice a month to pick up pigeon feed because my grandmother loved to feed pigeons. And I would be the one to go with her and pull a little laundry cart filled with seed. But I couldn't find pictures of my house. And then I find this picture, that's my grandmother. Now you can't see it here. I've got copies of books if you want to look at the book. She was doing her garden. We had a house that was set back, right? Today there's a sliver apartment building there where the cheapest apartment is $750,000. So, yeah, amazing, right? So, my grandmother has this look on her face like, what do you do? My grandmother spoke no English. She came in from Poland, never had the need to speak English. So God knows what she was thinking, right? Here she is in her garden, and here's some guy setting up a camera in front of the house and taking pictures, right? But it was amazing to find this. I just keep on looking at this picture and I say to myself, what luck, right? Of all these pictures I found, and I did searches, the street is now called McGinnis Boulevard, but when I was a kid it was called Oakland Street. So I did searches for Oakland Street, McGinnis, 79, last names, first names, maiden names, and even dates of construction. I knew the house was fairly old. And then just one afternoon, late afternoon, I'm not really sure how, I typed in Newtown Creek, Greenpoint, Brooklyn, Oakland Street, and this picture pops up. Now it has nothing to do with Newtown Creek, but it is Oakland Street. But it's amazing to realize that I remember this house. This was a laundry pole, so we didn't have a dryer. They used to put the rope on it, right? This was my grandmother's garden. She grew a lot of her own food. My dad later put a flagpole there, and I buried a time capsule when I was 11 years old, which is long gone now because of the building that's there. But it's just an amazing concept to find. Then I found this thing there's this thing called the Center for Brooklyn History that has hundreds of thousands of articles, photographs, remnants, memories. And what's nice about this program, you go onto the website, you find the house, you can actually put your story on that house. So in their map, 79 Oakland Street has my recollection of growing up there, and 477 Leonard Street, where my dad's garage was, has my story working with my dad. So it's sort of a cool way of like sort of expanding into history.
So Dad, I've got another suggestion for you, because we're doing our archives. One of the things that you might check out is this Internet Archive, and they have a lot of scrapbooks.
Okay.
And people's scrapbooks have incredible things in them.
Yeah, they do. Yep.
And you can search them. You can search the name, you can search the street
Okay.
in somebody else's scrapbook.
You know,
It's really great.
more than likely, and I'm not saying I did, I probably saw something like that because I literally spent a year searching. And I used technique. I had friends from all over the country trying to find different associations. I remember seeing scrapbooks. Actually, these little quarter pins
Yeah,
came from a
right,
scrapbook idea. So, but what was really amazing is that during my childhood, I don't remember my father taking more than maybe 100 photographs, maybe. I mean, I found pictures of, we went for vacation in Florida. I found a picture of me on a surfboard. Year, I have no idea. But there weren't that many pictures, so I don't even know if we have a scrapbook. Now, my wife's family, they came in from Italy, they put together a scrapbook. But they did it because the son was trying to prove his citizenship to get into the army, and they needed some proof that they lived in Brooklyn, whatever it may be. But that's, I'll look for it. That's a good idea. Yeah, thank you. So, this is another friend of mine who bought the book, and she related to it because she grew up in South Brooklyn. I grew up in North Brooklyn. And she just said to myself, she said that it reminded her so much of her own childhood and how she didn't have many pictures of her family either. And this, if this started one thing, is it started about 30 people that I know to literally look for pictures of their family anywhere they could find them, which I think is a really good, if nothing else happens, I think that's a good idea. So with my grandmother, this is McCarran Park. McCarran Park was a park in Greenpoint across from my father's garage, which was built during the Depression. It had the largest pool in Brooklyn at the time, and this is actually the entrance that I used to go into. Water fountains, basketball courts, whatever else. My grandmother used to love to feed pigeons. So on the way back from picking up this pigeon feed, we would drag it through the park, and she would sit on a bench, and that's the exact bench. You know, you can't hardly see, but that's where she would sit, and she would throw pigeon food out, and the pigeons they never landed on her. They always landed around her, and she had this giant bag of food on her lap. They shot, that's me and my grandmother, me and my botch. So what the picture I was taking here was, I got low to the ground, because the pavement in the park were little hexagons or octagons, and I'd have done a wide sweeping shot with the pigeons in the foreground, and my grandmother who fell asleep the minute she sat down in the background with one hand in the bag of pigeon food and the other hand like this, but the pigeons never landed on her. But it was really amazing to find these pictures and see, I mean, this is in 1954, so none of those can be me. But that's what I did. That was part of what I did. So my brother. So my youngest son Dylan has Down syndrome. And my brother Michael, would have been considered part of one of the syndromes today, right? He was very, very difficult to deal with. He had his own structure in life. He used to brush his hair with a fork. He would, the schools, we both went to St. Stanislaus Kostka Polish Catholic School. The school said early on that he should be put in an institution, and it wasn't going to happen. But Michael had a uniqueness to himself that's the photograph I would have taken. Michael used to make radio shows on a tape recorder and send them to different radio stations. And as I mentioned in the book, I only know of one station that actually broadcast one of his interviews. Somehow Mickey Joe was his radio name. Mickey Joe got to speak to Jan and Dean, who were a surf music group, and he somehow got them to give him an interview, and somehow he got that interview on a station in California. We have no recollection of the tape, whatever it was, but I found some correspondence about that. My brother was a dedicated Three Stooges fan. Laurel and Hardy and Three Stooges were my brother's world, right? And the Mesrel Theater, the Three Stooges would come to as they introduced a new movie. And there was a guy in New York City at the time called Officer Joe Bolton, who had a TV show that only focused on Three Stooges stuff, right? So my brother drags me to the Mesrel Theater, and we see the movie, and the Three Stooges come on, and Joe Bolton comes on, and then the Three Stooges get in a bus and leave, and Joe Bolton says to somebody, "Where can I get something to eat?" And my brother grabs and says, "Come to my house." So Officer Joe in his fake police uniform had a bologna sandwich on white bread in our house, and it made my brother as happy as he could be. No photos. Zero photos of it. The reason the lace is up there is Michael, we had a big table in the middle of our living room which was covered with lace that my grandmother, and I still have the original lace, that's a picture of it, and Michael used to lay out his radio and his recording stuff right on that lace. And then he would have a phone, a dial-up rotary phone on another table, because he'd be making phone calls to everybody to say, "I got this cool interview," but only one, as I know, ever got listed. But with Michael, I would shoot him doing his recordings, because he went into a world of his own. He was no longer Michael Joseph Kubis, he was Mickey Joe, radio announcer. And he used to make up commercials. He would make up commercials for my father's garage, for things that he knew were going on. He would get into this thing where he literally became another person. And if I want to think about it in detail, and it came up a lot when I was writing the stories, he really wasn't there. Somebody else was there. And Mickey Joe was different than Michael Joseph Kubis, because they were literally two different personalities. Michael had a really, really rough life. He had a lot of what we would call developmental disabilities today, and he held a job at Petróleos Mexicanos as a messenger for many, many years, but his later part of his life was very, very sad. He died of alcoholism, but he made an impression on me, because I would never saw someone who has such dedication to do something that had almost no positive end result. I'm sure Michael never realized that all of the shows that he made dozens of them. He even made a couple of films. Never went anywhere, but he kept on doing it. And it was maybe kept him out of trouble, maybe I have no idea. But it was something that was really unique. And that look, Michael had incredibly dynamic blue eyes. That look was the Mikey look. That was the Mickey Joe look. When you knew that he was looking at you, there was something going to happen. Might be good, might be bad, but that was the look. And that's one of 3 pictures I found of him. So this is another shot. Now this is the only shot I really altered because my arm was here, so I took it out. But that was your typical Mickey Joe. He was always very, very thin. When he died, he was under 70 pounds. And he always had this sort of this wonderful smile, but he really wasn't there. As much as people wanted to be there, Michael was on his own. So that's Officer Joe Bolton. Those are the 3 Stooges. There's the Jan and Dean story. It's an amazing concept when you realize here's this kid who was probably 17 years old. He was 5 years older than I was. That he would create these radio shows, and they were 30-minute shows, and he would send tapes out. I remember the tape recorder he had. I remember the microphone he had. I remember him going to Radio Shack and dragging me to this place in the city on 43rd Street that sold professional equipment, and he would come back and do these shows. God knows where he got the money from, but who knew? So this is another person who read the book. The idea was that all of these comments, and I get them even more today, all of these comments bring out things that I wanted the book to get across. I wanted the book for people to think about their childhood, their emotions, the details in their life. Right? We all look at strategic things, but the details are really what makes it. Also the fact that these memories are something that we don't really have long-term memory anymore because everything has been put on a smartphone. Today I was teaching a class this morning, and I said, I got a picture of luggage. It's about 5 years old. I just typed in luggage, and on my phone the picture appeared. And when I drive around, I use GPS, and I never needed to use anything because I knew everything was. I've now given into GPS. So we tend to be losing some of these memories because we just don't have the physical record. At least the older people don't have the physical record. So me. So I'm Thaddeus A. Kubis. I was named Anthony after a guy who lived upstairs in our house, a very wonderful person. That was my confirmation name. I'm sorry, this is the wrong slide. Okay, that should be Thaddeus B. Okay, my name is Thaddeus Bronislaus Anthony Kubis. Bronislaus was named after my uncle Bronislaus, who was shot down in World War II. He was born in Poland, came to the United States. When Poland was invaded, he joined the Canadian Air Force, then the British Air Force, and was shut down, I think, like in 41 or 42, right? So I got his middle name. Anthony, as I mentioned, was my neighbor upstairs. I wanted my confirmation name to be Zorro, because I loved the Zorro show. But as a priest told me, Zorro was not a saint. But to me, he was. He was this guy who'd come off and he'd always fix things, right? He'd always save people, but they didn't let me happen to. Greenpoint, Brooklyn is known for a couple things. It's known for its smell, because underneath Greenpoint, Brooklyn, even today, there's a huge pool of oil because of the big refinery area. It's also known for the fact that the USS Monitor was built on Noble Street in Greenpoint, Brooklyn, and this plaque, it's still there, but every time they put another plaque up, someone steals it. So, but for me, I would put myself, I bike ride. I love to bike ride. I still do today, less because I have asthma from my parents smoking so much, right? But I would get up in the morning. My best friend Philip Rass, who lived down about 10 blocks away, we would hook up someplace and we would bike ride. So we did things like we bike ride from Greenpoint, Brooklyn to Montauk, New York, and camped out there. My parents thought I was at his house. His parents thought that I was he was at my house. We bike ride to Bear Mountain. We bike ride over to George Washington Bridge to New Jersey. We went on these really wonderful trips. And I lived on my bike. And Greenpoint was the perfect place because it was very safe. It was this really wonderful, safe neighborhood. But my favorite place in Greenpoint was at the end of a thing called West Street. And West Street faces the East River. And it still has in places wooden streets that were built there because they could be easily fixed and replaced, right? And this is the street that I would ride down. Well, actually, that's where I'd ride down from. And down this way, there was a pier. And that pier was a pier that had dumpsters on it, barges, whatever else. It was also, I found out later on, a place where the mafia would dump cars with bodies in them. And then what they would do is they would bring a barge over, tie the barge up, and for about 4 or 5 days, the car would be pounded into the mud. And I never believed it, but then when I was teaching in New York City College of Technology, one of my friends there said to me, look at this article. And off of Noble Street, they pulled out about 30 cars, and they had bodies in over every one of them. So obviously the story was true. But the shot I would do of myself would be, I would take my bike, put it on the end of the pier. I have New York City in the background. 6th Avenue was being built at that time, all the the big buildings. I would sit on one of the pier pilings. I'd wait for the sun to sort of maybe feel in the back of my head, and I'd have my little timer on my Minolta SRT 101, which my parents bought me when I was 13, when they went on a trip. They went on a wedding anniversary to the Caribbean. And I would set the timer, run there, and sit there and hope I got the shot. Now, I never took that shot because I never thought of it at the time. Probably didn't think too much at the time. So that's my story. That's this concept of how I, why, if I could have gone back, I would take pictures. I would love to make these pictures happen. As my brother says, hey, these were other photographs would my baby brother have taken if he could. So I hope you saw a little bit in peek in my life. If you've got any questions, I'll gladly answer them.
I'd just like to say it's wonderful that you put this together about your life.
Thank you.
Because I think and especially today with the cameras, I mean, you take so many pictures and we don't, I don't put them in books anymore. I just keep taking pictures. I have thousands and thousands of pictures on my phone.
So supposedly only 1/100% of photographs are ever looked at twice when you photograph them on a smartphone.
Right.
I have something like 18,000 pictures on my smartphone, but on my computer at home I have nearly 100,000, and I do that as a living, so I should have more, but that goes to show you the scope of it. And this kid, here he was 16 or 17, he had 500 photographs from his birthday. And that was only the ones that he and his family took. And he goes, yeah, I'm getting videos from my friends. So it wasn't the easiest thing to do. One of the things that was nice about it is that I was able to, well, thank you for all this, but one of the easiest things to do was that because I taught print production, we were talking about that early on, I had all these connections into the digital book printing area. So I worked with these guys at Marathon Press. So, and my friend Robin Antic, who used to work for me when I had a marketing company, designed the book. We both designed it. So I had that ability to do that. What I've done since, though, is about 4 or 5 people have asked us to create books for them. And most of them are families that are widely dispersed. There's a woman in New Jersey, in Middlesex, in New Jersey, I think it is, where her family is across the whole United States now. We are in the process of creating a book. They have a yearly event in November, and that book is going to be printed and presented to every one of their family members in November. Now, there's I think there's 8 or 9 family members direct, so there's like 40 people. And with digital technology, you can print 5 books. It doesn't really matter. You get it done. So thank you. I really appreciate you guys coming.
Thank you.
I was looking through,
Thank you.
I was looking through some pictures in anticipation of this talk, and probably from the 50s. They were probably, or even earlier. And the one thing is, I was actually surprised at how many we had. And part of it was because my uncle became a priest, and so the family gathered from all kinds of places.
Okay.
But there's no names on the back.
Right.
So the thing is, people have to, all these wonderful pictures we have also in the archives here, no names. So it's really, somehow we have to keep reinforcing, please put names on your pictures.
Well, today you don't have to worry about it because he identifies the head and it links it to your phone.
Yeah.
I found a photograph. So my grandmother, there was my on my mom's side, she had 2 sisters and 2 brothers. My dad's side, he had 3 sisters and 2 brothers, right? And we used to meet at our house, since that's where the grandmother lived, the Bobshi lived, probably around the holidays. And there's one photograph that I found that has about 25 people in it. So from what I remember some of the people. I remember my Uncle
Right.
Chester, my Uncle Adam, some of the other ones. But beyond that, there are no names.
Right.
And even on the back, Kodak started to print dates on pictures probably in the late 50s, but not every processor offered that.
Right.
So you have no way of, unless you've got some sort of cycle in there, there's just no way of knowing. But yeah, it's amazing. One of the other things I remember in this book was a neighbor a couple doors down. His grandfather was a German immigrant who won the Iron Cross in World War I, right? And he was highly decorated. He came to the States and he worked at some Apple company in Queens, and like an apple drink, apple sauce. And he used to bring us gallons of rejected apple cider because it had too much stuff in them. But those are the things that I could never give back. Those are memories, and it must be, if I wrote those down, there's like a 500-page book, that they all were reactivated by searching for this book. So, but we don't, no pictures, no names. It's amazing.
The other thing is, when I read your book, and when we've talked about this a number of times, that even though my family was in Holyoke, Massachusetts, and yours was in New York, how similar the things were. And
Yeah.
both families were Polish, so that was part of it as well. But even that, we had the pigeons in the park too. I have the picture of the pigeons and you know, when you think about that, it's really quite amazing how
So
similar
I recall a pigeon story. So I used to go up to this guy's pigeon nest on North 5th or North 8th Street, and he would be there singing and stuff. And that's where I'd help him clean out his
yeah,
Coops,
yeah,
Coops.
yeah.
And if you ever see the movie The Producers, with Mel Brooks, there's a shot on the roof. That was what the pigeon coop looked like. I thought for a while they must have gone to this guy's house and shot it. But this is not the best thing to say, but of all the years that I've been in New York City, I was only pooped on a pigeon once. And I was with my son Dylan in Times Square, and it hit me here, here, and here. But of all those years, that's the only time. So pigeons are considered flying
That
rats.
was always good.
Yeah, flying reptiles. So.
Yeah.
Just wanted to share, in the 80s, I fell in love with a Polish woman, and I moved to communist Poland. And it was quite a treasure chest because they were in a different era because it was communist. So they were like more like in the 50s. So we had the laundry machine like you're talking about. The photography was all black and white, which I love taking photographs, and I thought it was amazing. And their color was like early Kodak color. It was kind of tacky, but I would just take pictures in black and white. And it was a treat to see that era that disappeared after, it wasn't communist anymore.
We found out later on, my aunt and my uncle went to Poland. They were involved in a car crash. He died. My dad had to go over and get my aunt because she was sick. But we found out when she was dead, this was when it was still communist, that the communists would go into houses and destroy pictures. They didn't want any recollection of the past. And if they were holy pictures or funeral pictures, they would be the first ones to go. So as much as it would have been wonderful to, and I met some of these people, they first didn't have the money to do it, but if they did, they were probably destroyed anyway.
That's funny that you bring that up because like I would take pictures everywhere, and then but at airports and train stations, they didn't want you to take pictures. So the police, the militia, they would come over and say, no photos, no photos. And I'd ask my girlfriend, like, what are they scared about? Like World War II is over. Like, what are they? And it was like no pictures. If you did take the pictures, they'd probably rip the film out.
So I've got this strange belief that in the old fax days, when someone said they sent you a fax and you never got it, it went to fax heaven.
Yeah.
And someplace in the cosmos, there is every lost photograph just waiting to be dropped someplace. But it is amazing how we take it for granted and we just photograph. There's a guy in New York, an NYU professor, which I think is a nut job. He built it. He had a camera put in his forehead, his back, and on all four quarters, and he lived that way for about a year and recorded everything he did. And then he stitched them together to give a 360 degree, and he thought he was going to be some great celebrity. He had a premiere, like 3 people came. So it goes to show you we can overdo things. Yeah.
I used to scrapbook, and mainly of travel. And in addition to photographs, which we printed, and I would shoot, originally I used to shoot slides, and that was
Probably Ektachrome.
the 2¼ Ektachrome.
Oh, yeah, Ektachrome, yeah,
It was
yeah.
out of roll recorder.
Yep.
And I have maybe 40 albums. And it's one of the few things that in Mass we took to Florida when we moved from up north.
So you have those? Yeah?
Pardon?
You have them? Yeah.
It's this wall in one closet, and it's, yes, there's about.
Takes up all the space that I need for other things.
And my question is, no, I stopped doing that about 6-7 years ago, and I now only do it, online, on my computer.
Right.
I've got probably 12,000 shots. Obviously, our kids have absolutely zero interest
Yeah.
in that. Occasionally, when they are setting something up, is it there, do you have a picture of when I was 13 or something like that? What the hell? I would like everybody's advice. What do I do? I can't get rid of it because I feel close to it. I do have the last 12 years or so, 15 years, online, but only photographs. The scrapbooks used to have bus tickets
Yeah.
or memorabilia. Tony used to write a little précis of when we visited a port. She'd write it and I print it out and put it. What the hell do we do?
So a friend of mine, John
Am I
Favat.
being stupid? Let me ask you this way.
No. It's this is I've given this presentation dozens of times, and that same question comes up. So a friend of mine, John Favat, he had probably about 80,000 pictures. His father was an active, not a professional photographer, but he photographed everything. He had about 80,000 pictures. So it was amazing. And he says to me, "Can you scan them for me?" I said, "John, I mean, a scan takes 40 minutes and working. Yeah, sure I can, right?" So what we did is we found a service called Legacy Box, and Kodak has one, and they made a deal. But what he did, I'll tell you what he did with it. So what he is, he literally had these things done. And of course, it wasn't cheap.
Right.
Believe me, it wasn't cheap. But then what he did is he created a series of DVDs and sent them to his kids as a holiday gift. But what he did that was unique, and it came from an idea I read about, there was a woman photographer in Chicago. She photographed Chicago from like 1919, and she died maybe 10, 15 years ago, right? She never processed a single roll of film. So they get into her apartment, and she has, I'm going to say 10,000 rolls. I have no idea. They opened unprocessed film. So they opened up a lab to process the film, and they sold those pictures to Getty stock. So she had, and her family ended up getting about $3 million from the pictures, because she has pictures of Chicago that just no one else had. She would get out, her husband worked, I think he worked for a bus driver or something. She'd walk around Chicago and in taking pictures, but in between those pictures, she would take pictures of her family.
Right.
And then no one wanted them until they were worth a lot of money. But I don't know what to do with them. I mean, it's not cheap. It's usually about $500-600 a box to get transferred over, and a box could be very, very small. But I hate to see them go. I put all of these pictures that I found into a scrapbook.
The protocol is from 60 years ago, faded.
Yeah, well, so you could, that could be
It's
changed.
faded.
That could be changed. That could be just renewed using a digital process. So one of the wonderful things about digital technology is I could take any picture and make it look like it was taken yesterday. I chose, as I mentioned, not to do that. I wanted these pictures to look old. So the picture of my brother, which is sort of grainy and broken up, I could have fixed that, but I didn't want to do that. But they could do that. That's relatively easy to do. There are, if you had a couple of 100 of them, there's a device for your iPhone. You take the slide, you put it on your iPhone, you open up the app, put it on top of the iPhone, and it makes a copy. And you do like that really, really quick. There was a thing called a kinescope, which is what the professionals would do. They would load up trays of slides, and they would shoot them onto film, or they shoot them onto a digital file later on. But I don't know what to tell you, except getting them copied and trying to make some sort of.
But then I've got digital photos nobody wants.
Well, you got to get your family to want them. I mean, my two sons look at this, they go.
Well, my son does the same thing, because he makes annual photo books, right? They actually make, he makes a
They
photo.
make a yearbook. of
Yeah,
their
I have a friend who does that, yeah. Now it's
Mine-
online, they do, it's a web page. Well, since one of the problems is, we're talking about books, right? So one of the problems with today is that people need to touch things. It's called haptic, right? You have to, you've got to touch paper, you've got to touch the texture, you've got to feel it. They discovered that when young people are learning on iPads or screens, they learn half as much, twice as long, because there's no physical touching. So you could look, what's the name of the company? Sappy Paper did a huge book on it. It's all data. It's really amazing. So digital stuff is great, but you touch the screen. When you touch, well, I know with me, when I was touching this picture, I actually felt the picture. As weird as it may sound, I felt those shots. I felt the picture. When I had the picture of my mother, which was in the album,
Yeah.
I felt her in that studio, and it brought a lot of emotions up. And with digital, you don't have that. Screens are screens.
And that translates to today, to young people today in their 18 and 20s, that it's still, that if they don't have the texture, that they will not.
The digital revolution was wonderful, but it was deadly in many other ways.
Mm.
And yes.
So then we have a huge problem now, right?
Oh, you're starting to see articles about it now that they realize, well, you know what, maybe we should have. A lot of schools, I teach photography at a bunch of schools, they've now banned phones.
Right.
I heard about that.
They've limited computer. They tell you that, I just read a study yesterday, that you should not have a young child spend more than 3 hours a week on a display. So yeah, but remember, the picture, you feel something,
Right.
there's a bit of a smell, there's a texture, the way the print was made. If we don't get that with digital stuff.
The photography book might be, the
Yeah.
album is
Yeah, you open it
a
up.
little weathered.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very moving.
It's a sad, I got a call from a guy, when the article I had about this, it was in the Berkshire Eagle, a guy called me up and said to me, this is a great script for a movie. He said, the only problem is no one's gonna watch it. He said, because people can't relate to these things. It's really a separation of generations. You know, it was like rock and roll music. When I was in a band, my father would say, huh? You know, and now people look at physical pictures and say, huh? So
And everybody telling everybody's story now, like, there's just millions of stories and everybody's like putting it out there.
well, that's the whole concept. The stories have become a commodity.
Right,
And, you know, and also you don't know what your past is gonna bring up. You know,
right.
if you look at my past, I had a wonderful childhood, but when I tell people about some of the things that happened, they say, well, your parents were mean. No, they weren't. This is what they were.
Yeah.
You know? Why did my parents give me this advice? They didn't know. So I would hate them for it? So anyway, I don't know what to tell you.
I hear it. No, I agree with you.
So- Donate them to the library, then 70 years from now, someone's gonna wanna find pictures about 1962, and they're gonna say, oh, you did that with those
Yeah.
glass negatives that we found, or you found,
Oh, that's nice.
yeah. But thank you all.
Yeah.
Thank you.